Do you know, there was a time when the sun never set on a British car. In the 1950s, the UK was the second largest automaker on the planet. From the rolling hills of the Midlands to the streets of New York and the outback of Australia, British badges, Austin, Morris, Triumph, MG, Rover, they were all symbols of freedom, engineering, and a certain kind of plucky sophistication. But today, if you look at the British car industry, it looks more like a global map. Jaguar Land Rover is Indian owned. Mini and Rolls Royce, well, they're German. Lotus and MG, Chinese. Bentley, well, that's also German. How did the nation that invented the Mini, the Land Rover, and the E-Type go from being a global powerhouse to a collection of high-end boutiques and foreign-owned subsidiaries? This is the story of the British car industry, a tale of brilliant engineering, catastrophic management, and the slow, painful decline of a national icon. In the late 19th century, Britain was actually a bit late to the party. While Benz and Daimler were tinkering over in Germany, the UK was held back by the Red Flag Act, which literally required a man to walk in front of a car waving a flag. Once that absurdity was scrapped, the floodgates opened. Britain didn't just build cars, we built the car culture. By the 1920s, two titans emerged, Herbert Austin and William Morris. Austin gave us the Austin 7, the car that put Britain on wheels and was so good that BMW's first ever car was actually a licensed Austin 7. Morris, meanwhile, they used Ford-style mass production to bring prices down. By the 1930s, the Midlands, particularly Birmingham and Coventry, had become the Detroit of the UK. It was a patchwork of hundreds of small specialised firms. This fragmented nature was charming, but it was a ticking time bomb. While the Americans were consolidating into the big three, the British industry remained a sprawling collection of rival companies, often located just a few miles apart, fiercely competing for the same customers. Post-World War II, the British government issued a mandate, export or die. To get steel rations, car makers had to sell abroad, and for a decade they dominated. In 1948, the Land Rover was born. Originally intended as a stopgap agricultural vehicle, it became a global legend. Then came the sports cars, the MGT series and the Triumph TRs. They became darlings of American GIs returning home. But the 1950s also saw the beginning of the merger madness. In 1952, Austin and Morris merged to form BMC, the British Motor Corporation. On paper, they were a giant. In reality, they were two different companies that hated each other, still using different engines, different parts, different dealerships. Then came 1959, the Mini. Designed by Alec Issigonis in response to the Suez fuel crisis, it was a packaging miracle. It was the first classless car, driven by both the Beatles and your local grocer. It should have made BMC a fortune. Instead, they reportedly lost money on every single one they made because they just hadn't worked out the true production cost. It was a microcosm of the industry, really. Brilliant design, poor business. The 1960s and 1970s are where the wheels truly fell off, though. In 1968, the government pushed for one final massive merger. They combined almost every remaining British brand, Jaguar, Rover, Austin, Triumph, MG, into one behemoth, British Leyland. It was a disaster from day one. BL was a mess of 40 different plants, dozens of unions, and a model range that just competed with itself. Quality control plummeted. This was the era of the Austin Allegro. I had one of those when I was a kid. It was a car famously fitted with a Quartic, which was squarish, steering wheel, and bodywork so weak that if you jacked it up in the wrong place, the rear window would pop out. And while British workers were on strike and management was fighting in the boardroom, the Japanese were arriving. Datsun, now Nissan, Toyota, and Honda were building cars that were cheaper, more reliable, and didn't leak oil on your driveway. By 1975, British Leyland was bankrupt. The government nationalised it to save jobs. But you can't legislate for quality. The British disease, a mix of militant trade unionism and indifferent management, had become a global punchline. In the 1980s, Thatcher's government decided enough was enough. The state-owned mess was broken up and sold off. A pivotal moment occurred in 1986. Nissan opened a factory up in Sunderland. They brought Japanese efficiency to British soil, proving that British workers could build world-class cars if they were given the right management. But the domestic brands were dying. In 1994, the Rover Group, the last vestige of the mass-market British car industry, was sold to BMW. The Germans tried to fix it, but by 2000 they gave up, famously calling it the English patient. They kept the Mini brand, sold Land Rover and Jaguar to Ford, and gave the rest to a group of businessmen for a symbolic £10. That group, the Phoenix Four, oversaw the final collapse of MG Rover in 2005, when the gates at Longbridge finally closed. It wasn't just a factory ending, it was the end of a century of independent British mass production. So, where are we now? The British car industry is actually quite successful, but it's a boutique industry. We are world leaders in luxury, for example, Rolls-Royce and Bentley, in high performance, McLaren, Aston Martin, and in Formula One. We still build over 800,000 cars a year, but the profits, they go to Mumbai, Munich, or Wolfsburg. The decline wasn't caused by a lack of talent. It was caused by a failure to modernise, a refusal to collaborate, and a series of mergers that created a house of cards. Today, as we pivot towards electric vehicles, Britain faces a new challenge. Can we build the batteries and technology to keep the remaining factories open? The badges might still say London or Solihull, but the story of British cars is now a global one. The empire didn't disappear, it just changed hands.